If you had told me 30 years ago that my own son would one day ask me to leave the house I built for him, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of humbling even the most devoted hearts. Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. My name is Robert Miller. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. My father was a mechanic, my mother a waitress, and I learned early that nothing in life comes easy. I was the first in my family to graduate high school, and I went straight to work at the local factory, clocking in before sunrise and coming home long after dark. I met my wife, Linda, at a 4th of July picnic. She had a laugh that could light up the whole park, and a kindness that made everyone feel at home. We married young, and soon after, our son David was born. Holding him for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never known. I promised myself that I would give him a better life than I'd ever had. Those early years were tough. Linda worked part-time at the library, and I picked up every overtime shift I could. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, with a leaky roof and a yard full of dandelions. But it was ours, and it was filled with love. Every spare dollar went into a savings account for David's future. We skipped vacations, drove old cars, and wore hand-me-downs so we could have new shoes for school and a computer for his homework. David was a bright kid, curious and full of questions. He loved baseball, and I never missed a single game, no matter how tired I was. Linda would pack sandwiches, and we'd sit in the bleachers, cheering him on. I taught him how to ride a bike, how to change a tire, how to treat people with respect. I wanted him to know that hard work and kindness were worth more than any amount of money. When David was 12, Linda got sick. Cancer. The word itself felt like a punch to the gut. The treatments were expensive, and the bills piled up faster than I could pay them. I sold my truck, cashed out my retirement fund, and took a second job at the hardware store. I never told David how close we came to losing the house. I wanted him to focus on school, not worry about grown-up problems. Linda passed away on a cold November morning. The world felt emptier without her, but I had to keep going for David's sake. I became mother and father, cook and chauffeur, cheerleader and disciplinarian. I made mistakes, but I did my best. I packed his lunches, helped with science projects, and listened to his dreams of becoming an engineer. David grew into a fine young man. He graduated at the top of his class, earned a scholarship to Ohio State, and made me prouder than I ever thought possible. I worked overtime to help with his expenses, sent care packages, and called every Sunday to hear about his classes and new friends. When he graduated, he landed a job with a tech company in Columbus. He was making more money at 22 than I ever had in my life. He met Emily at work, a smart, ambitious woman from Chicago. They married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just the two of them and a couple of friends. I wished Linda could have been there. After the wedding, David called and said, "Dad, I want you to move in with us. You've done enough. Let me take care of you now." I hesitated, but he insisted. "You're not getting any younger, Dad. The house is too much for you alone. Come live with us. We'll be a family again." I sold the old house on Maple Street, packed up my memories, and moved into their new home in the suburbs. It was a beautiful place, open floor plan, big backyard, everything Linda and I had dreamed of but never had. I thought maybe this was my reward for a lifetime of sacrifice, a chance to be close to my son, to watch him build his own family, to finally rest. But as the days turned into months, I began to notice small changes. A coldness in David's voice, impatience in Emily's eyes, a sense that I no longer belonged in the home I had helped make possible. I told myself it was just the way of the world. Children grow up, parents grow old, and life moves on. But deep down, I hoped that the roots I had planted, the love, the sacrifice, the lessons, would hold us together. I hoped that, no matter what, my son would remember the father who gave him everything. But hope, I would soon learn, is a fragile thing. The first signs were so subtle, I almost convinced myself they weren't real. A sigh when I asked a question, a forced smile at the dinner table, conversation that stopped the moment I walked into the room. I tried to ignore these small discomforts, telling myself that every family has its awkward moments, that maybe I was just being sensitive. But the feeling of being a guest in my own son's home grew stronger with each passing week. Emily was always polite, but her words carried a sharpness that stung. "Robert, could you please remember to rinse your coffee cup?" She'd say, her tone light but her eyes cold. Or, "Robert, I know you mean well, but please don't give Max so many cookies. We're trying to watch his sugar." I would nod, apologize, and retreat to my room, feeling smaller each time. David, too, seemed to change. He was always busy. Work calls, meetings, dinners with clients. Our conversations became brief, limited to polite greetings and the occasional question about my health. The boy who once begged me to play catch in the yard now barely had time to ask if I'd eaten. I tried to make myself useful, fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn, helping Max with his homework. But even these small gestures seemed to irritate Emily. "Robert, you don't need to do all this. We have a service for the yard. Let them handle it." Or, "Max has a tutor now. You should relax and enjoy your retirement." Relax. The word felt like a dismissal, a gentle push toward the sidelines. I began to spend more time in my room, reading old newspapers, watching the world go by from the window. The house was filled with laughter and conversation, but I was no longer part of it. The real change came after David's promotion. He started talking about moving to a bigger house, one closer to his office and Emily's parents. "It'll be better for Max," he said one night over dinner, not meeting my eyes. "He'll have better schools, more opportunities." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my heart sank. I knew what this meant. I was no longer part of their plans. Emily's parents visited often, their presence filling the house with a different kind of energy. They spoke of travel, investments, and the latest gadgets. Their conversations peppered with stories of cruises and golf tournaments. I tried to join in, but my stories of working double shifts and fixing up the old house on Maple Street seemed out of place. Relics from a world they had left behind. One evening, as I sat in my room, I overheard Emily and David talking in the hallway. Their voices were low, but the words carried through the thin walls. "He's getting older, David. He forgets things, leaves the door unlocked, misplaces his pills. What if something happens to Max because of him?" David sighed. "He's my dad, Emily. I can't just... We have our own family now. Max needs stability. Your dad needs care, but maybe it's time to think about what's best for everyone." Right. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to believe they were just worried about me, that their concern came from a place of love. But the truth was harder to swallow. I was becoming a burden. It's an inconvenience in the life I had worked so hard to build. The days that followed were filled with small humiliations. Emily began locking the kitchen at night, citing safety concerns. David stopped giving me money for groceries, insisting that everything would be handled by the housekeeper. Max was enrolled in more after-school activities, leaving little time for our evening walks. I tried to talk to David to remind him of the bond we once shared. "Son, do you remember the old baseball glove I gave you? You used to sleep with it under your pillow." He smiled, distracted. "Yeah, Dad, those were good times. But things are different now. Life is busy." Busy. The word echoed in my mind, a reminder that I no longer fit into the rhythm of their lives. One afternoon, I found Max sitting alone in his room, his eyes red from crying. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Mom says I can't go to the park with you anymore. She says you're too old, that you might get lost." I hugged him tightly, fighting back tears. "I'm not going anywhere, Max. I'll always be here for you." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. The final blow came on a Sunday morning. David called me into the living room. Emily sat beside him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Max played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Dad," David began, his voice formal, "we've been thinking about the future. The new house doesn't have an extra room. It's smaller, but in a better area. We think it's time for you to consider moving somewhere else. Maybe with Uncle Mike in Florida, or a senior community nearby. It's for your comfort, too. You'll have people your age, activities, everything you need. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, and saw a stranger. Emily avoided my gaze, her lips pressed into a thin line. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. I wanted to remind him of the nights I stayed awake by his bedside when he was sick, the years I worked double shifts so he could go to college, the dreams I had for him. But all I could manage was a quiet "I see." David shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that we don't care, Dad. It's just, things are different now. We have our own responsibilities. You'll be happier somewhere you can make friends, have your own space." I nodded, numb. "When do you want me to leave?" Emily answered this time, her voice brisk. "By the end of the month, we'll help you pack. If you need anything, let us know." I stood up, my legs trembling. Max looked up at me, his big eyes full of innocence. I managed a weak smile, ruffled his hair, and walked back to my room. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faded photograph of Linda on my nightstand. 30 years. 30 years of sacrifice, and now I was being asked to leave the home I had built, the family I had devoted my life to. I felt invisible, discarded, like an old piece of furniture no one wanted anymore. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of laughter drifting up from the living room. I realized, with a pain sharper than any I had ever known, that I was no longer part of their happiness. I was an inconvenience, a burden. The next morning, I began packing my things. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like a piece of my life slipping away. A worn sweater Linda had knitted, a set of tools I'd used to fix the house, or a stack of letters from David's childhood. I moved slowly, savoring the memories, mourning the loss. As the days passed, David and Emily grew more distant. They avoided me, speaking only when necessary. Max sensed the change, clinging to me whenever he could, asking why Grandpa was sad. I had no answer for him. On my last night in the house, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought of all the dreams I had planted, all the love I had given. I wondered if any of it had mattered. When the morning came, I carried my suitcase downstairs. David was waiting by the door, his face tense. Emily hovered in the background, checking her phone. Max ran to me, hugging my legs. "Grandpa, don't go," he whispered. I knelt down, holding him close. "I have to, buddy. But I'll always love you." David cleared his throat. "We'll visit, Dad. We'll call." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of 30 years pressing down on my shoulders. As I walked away from the house, I didn't look back. I had given them everything. And now, I had nothing left to give. The world outside felt unfamiliar, as if I had stepped into a life that was no longer mine. The streets I had known for decades seemed colder, the faces of neighbors more distant. I carried my suitcase to the bus stop, my heart heavy with memories and regret. The city moved around me, indifferent to my pain. I spent the first few nights at my old friend Tom's house. He welcomed me with open arms, his wife insisting I take the guest room. Their kindness was a balm, but I could not shake the feeling of being a burden. I tried to help around the house, fixing leaky faucets and tending the small garden. But I knew I was only a guest, not family. Tom listened quietly as I told him what had happened. He shook his head, his eyes full of sympathy. "You gave your life for them, Rob. Kids forget, but life has a way of teaching lessons. Your story isn't over yet." His words comforted me, but the ache in my chest remained. I missed my home, the creak of the stairs, the smell of Emily's baking, the sound of Max's laughter. I missed the life I had built, the sense of purpose that had guided me for so long. Days turned into weeks. I tried to keep busy, visiting the local church, volunteering at the library, helping Tom with errands. But every evening, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I felt the emptiness settle over me like a shroud. I wondered if David ever thought of me, if Max asked where Grandpa had gone. One afternoon, as I walked through the park, I saw a group of kids playing baseball. Their laughter echoed across the field, reminding me of the days when David was young. When I would pitch slow balls so he could hit them over the fence, I sat on a bench, watching them, lost in memories. An older man joined me, his hair white, his eyes kind. We struck up a conversation, sharing stories of our children, our struggles, our hopes. He told me about his own son, who had moved to California and rarely called. We raised them, we love them, but in the end, they belong to the world, not to us, he said, his voice gentle. His words stayed with me. That night, I wrote a letter to David. I poured my heart onto the page, telling him how much I loved him, how proud I was of the man he had become, how I wished him happiness. I did not mention the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. I wanted him to remember me as a father who loved unconditionally, not as a man broken by disappointment. I mailed the letter the next morning, feeling a strange sense of relief. I had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to him. As the days passed, I began to find small moments of peace. I joined a group of retirees who met every week to share stories and play cards. I started tutoring neighborhood kids in math, helping them with their homework. Their gratitude, their laughter, filled a void I hadn't realized was there. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. It was not the life I had planned, not the life I had sacrificed for, but it was mine. I learned to find joy in simple things: a cup of coffee shared with a friend, a walk in the park, the smile of a child I had helped, but beneath the surface, the wound remained. I could not forget the way David had looked at me that day, the coldness in his voice, the finality of his words. I wondered if he would ever understand what he had lost, if he would ever feel the emptiness I carried with me. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, Tom joined me. "You have a good heart, Rob," he said. "But sometimes people need to learn the value of what they've lost. Sometimes life teaches lessons in ways we can't imagine." His words planted a seed in my mind. For the first time since I had left my home, I began to think not just of my own pain, but of what David might one day feel. I wondered if there was a way to help him see, to help him understand the true cost of his choices. I started to look at my life differently. I realized that I still had something left to give. Not just to myself, but to the son I still loved. Even if he had forgotten how to love me in return, I began to gather the documents I had kept safe for years. Property papers, bank statements, insurance policies, and the will I had written after Linda's death. I had always intended to leave everything to David, to ensure his future and Max's. But now, I realized that true inheritance was not measured in money or property, but in the lessons we leave behind. I visited a lawyer, a kind woman named Ms. Carter, who listened patiently as I explained my situation. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You have every right to decide what happens to your assets, Mr. Miller. If you wish to make changes, I will help you."
Ow.
Together, we rewrote my will. I decided to leave the house, the one I had built with my own hands, the one David and Emily now called their own, to a local children's charity. The money I had saved over the years would go to scholarships for underprivileged kids, so they could have the opportunities I had given my son. I kept a small amount for myself, enough to live simply and with dignity. It was not an act of anger, but of clarity. I wanted my legacy to be one of kindness, of hope, of second chances. I wanted David to understand that love is not a right, but a gift, one that must be cherished, not taken for granted. I wrote a second letter to David explaining my decision. I told him about the will, about the house, about the scholarships. I told him that I still loved him, that I wished him happiness, but that I could not reward ingratitude with more sacrifice. I asked him to remember the lessons I had tried to teach him, the value of family, the importance of respect, the meaning of true wealth. I mailed the letter, my hands trembling. I did not know how he would react. I did not know if he would be angry, or hurt, or simply indifferent. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Days passed, then weeks. I heard nothing from David. Life continued in its quiet rhythm. I tutored my students, played cards with my friends, visited the church. I found comfort in the knowledge that my actions would help others. My sacrifices would not be forgotten. But I also knew that the lesson had only just begun. The days grew longer, and the ache in my chest slowly faded into something else: resolve. I realized that I had spent my entire life giving, always putting others first, always believing that love and sacrifice would be enough. But sometimes the greatest lesson you can teach is to let go. To show that your worth is not defined by how much you endure, but by how much you respect yourself. I settled into a small apartment on the edge of town, a modest place with a view of the river and enough sunlight to keep a few houseplants alive. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, I made decisions for myself. I bought a comfortable chair, filled the shelves with books I'd always wanted to read, and learned to cook simple meals. I discovered that solitude, when chosen, can be a kind of freedom. I kept busy. I volunteered at the local food bank, helped organize community events, and continued tutoring kids who needed a little extra help. Their gratitude was genuine, their smiles a reminder that kindness never goes to waste. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was. It's not for what I could provide, but the world has a way of circling back. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, I saw David standing by my car. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "Dad," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I nodded, unlocking the car and gesturing for him to sit beside me. We drove in silence to a nearby park, the same one where I used to take him as a boy. We sat on a bench watching the river flow by. "I got your letter," David began, his hands shaking. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." He trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was selfish. I let Emily and her family influence me. I forgot everything you did for me, everything you gave up. I thought I was doing what was best for my family, but I see now that I was just thinking of myself." I listened quietly, my heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "I don't blame you for what you've done," he continued. "You have every right. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could go back to the way things were." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can't change the past, David, but we can learn from it. We can choose to be better, to do better." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I want to make it right, Dad. I want you to come home." I shook my head gently. "Home isn't a place, son. It's the people who love us, who respect us. I will always love you, but I can't return to a house where I'm not valued. You have to build your own home now, with your own hands, your own heart." David wept openly, his pride stripped away. For the first time, I saw not the man he had become, but the boy I had raised, the boy who had once run to me with scraped knees, who had once looked at me with love and trust. We sat together in silence, the weight of years between us. I knew that my lesson had been learned, not through anger or punishment, but through the quiet strength of letting go. After that day, things began to change. David called more often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask for advice. He started coming to the community events I helped organize, bringing Max along. Emily was distant at first, but over time, even she softened. Greeting me with a smile and a hug, I saw my grandson more. We rebuilt our bond, one baseball game and science project at a time. Max would ask me questions about my childhood, about Linda, about the old house on Maple Street. I told him stories not just of struggle, but of hope, of laughter, of the love that had built our family from nothing. David worked hard to repair our relationship. He apologized, not just with words, but with actions. He invited me to family dinners, asked for my opinion, made sure I felt included. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were learning together how to be a family again, but I never moved back in. I had found my own place in the world, a place where I was respected, where I could live with dignity. I visited often, but I always returned to my apartment, to the life I had built for myself. One evening, as we sat on the porch after dinner, David turned to me. "Dad, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to be a better son. I want Max to grow up knowing the value of family, the importance of respect, I want him to be proud of his grandpa and of his father. I looked at him, seeing not just my son, but a man humbled by his mistakes, striving to rebuild what he had lost. I placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture simple but full of meaning. We all make mistakes, David. What matters is what we do after. You have the chance to teach Max what truly matters in life. Don't waste it, he nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Not just for myself, but for my family. The lesson had been learned, not through anger, not through revenge, but through the quiet dignity of standing up for myself, of showing that love is a gift, not a guarantee. In the weeks and months that followed, life settled into a gentle, steady rhythm. I found myself waking each morning with a lighter heart, no longer weighed down by regret or longing. The pain of betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I continued volunteering at the food bank and tutoring kids at the library. Their gratitude was genuine, their respect unforced. In their eyes, I saw the reflection of the man I had always tried to be, patient, generous, and kind. I realized that family is not always defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to nurture, the kindness we offer, the love we give freely. Tom and his wife became my family in every way that mattered. We shared meals, celebrated small joys, and supported each other through life's inevitable hardships. I learned to find joy in simple things: a cup of coffee on the porch, a walk by the river, a phone call from a friend. I discovered that happiness is not about what you have, but about who you are and how you treat others. Occasionally, I would hear from David. His calls were hesitant at first, filled with awkward silences and unspoken apologies. But over time, our conversations grew warmer, more honest. He told me about Max's school, about his work, about the changes he was trying to make in his own life. He never asked for forgiveness directly, but I could hear the longing in his voice, the hope that one day he might earn back my trust. One Saturday afternoon, as I sat in the park watching the children play, David arrived with Max. Max ran to me, his arms open wide, his laughter ringing through the air. I lifted him into my lap, holding him close, feeling the simple, unbreakable bond between us. "Grandpa, will you come to my school play?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Of course, buddy. I wouldn't miss it for the world." David sat beside me, his expression uncertain. "Dad, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to be a better son. I want Max to grow up knowing the value of family, the importance of respect. I want him to be proud of his grandpa and of his father." I looked at him, seeing not just my son, but a man humbled by his mistakes, striving to rebuild what he had lost. I placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture simple but full of meaning. "We all make mistakes, David. What matters is what we do after. You have the chance to teach Max what truly matters in life. Don't waste it." He nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope, not just for myself, but for my family. The day of Max's school play arrived. I sat in the front row, my heart swelling with pride as he took the stage. He spotted me in the audience, waving excitedly, his smile brighter than the lights above. David and Emily sat beside me, their faces soft with emotion. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness is not a single act, but a journey, a series of small steps taken together, each one bringing us closer to understanding, to healing, to love. After the play, as we walked home together, Max slipped his hand into mine. "Grandpa, will you tell me a story tonight? One about when Dad was little?" I laughed, the sound light and free. "I have many stories, buddy, and I promise I'll tell you every single one." As the sun set behind the city, casting a golden glow over the world, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in years. My sacrifices had not been in vain. The lessons I had learned, the lessons I had taught, would live on, not just in my son, but in my grandson. And in every life I touched, I had lost much. But I had gained something far greater: the knowledge that love, once given freely, can never truly be taken away. It endures, it heals, and it transforms, even the deepest wounds. And so, as I walked hand in hand with Max, surrounded by the family I had helped shape, I knew that my story was not one of loss, but of hope, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bonds that define us all. If you have ever felt forgotten, if you have ever given everything and received little in return, remember this: your worth is not measured by the gratitude of others, but by the love you carry in your heart. And sometimes, the greatest lesson you can teach is to let go, to forgive, and to live with dignity and grace. This was my lesson. This was my legacy, and it was one I would never forget.